In my last video, I talked a lot about Renaissance, like its influence in all the stuff that we write with, write in, and hopefully consequently read. Something about this video being a little bit connected with the previous one, but in an odd way. My name is Ilarian Gordon, and I am spending my time here trying to figure out why there are so many designers out there, but the world is still as ugly as it was. During my career as a designer, I have encountered this so many times, it's almost laughable. A client can be enamored or spooked by a certain visual aspect of design, a detail they actually have no concept of or knowledge of. They may deem the idea superb or not worthy, and no amount of explanation would make them change their mind. This is a point of frustration. No one can say it with words. No one can literally elaborate on this. It's either bad or it's good in a person's mind. That's why we're talking today about something connected to that, to the perception of design. Let's be honest. Visual history of each era is influenced by its technology, its politics, its philosophy, and the events that happen during that time. Sometimes the present leans on people hard enough to leave a mark or make a pivot. Right now, you can take your pick. Wars won't end. Discrimination, we keep rediscovering like it's something new. It's maybe less oil, more lithium. A whole civilization quietly retooling itself around a different type of rock. And under all of it, the low hum of the feeling that the thing you're good at might not need you for very much longer. Yeah, you know that feeling, right? Hold on to it. We are going to come back to it. Britain, mid-19th century, the richest empire the world has ever assembled, and arguably the most confident. And if you were a certain kind of sensitive young person living in it, you were watching something you loved get fed into machine, literally. This is the part everyone gets slightly wrong, so let me be precise about it. The Industrial Revolution didn't just make things faster and cheaper. It changed the way who made things and how it felt to make them. I guess the cleanest way to see it is the Great Exhibition of 1851. Glass Cathedral, the Crystal Palace, stuffed with the triumphs of manufacturing from across the empire. And those triumphs were machine-made furniture pretending to be hand-carved, cast iron pretending to be wrought iron, ornament glued onto objects that had no need of it by people who had no relationship to it, like a chair leg shaped like a vine because a catalogue said vines were tasteful this season. Also, we need to understand what was the overall graphic design background of the era. I'll quote here The History of Graphic Design by Philip Meggs. Nostalgia and a canon of idealized beauty were expressed through printed images of children, maidens, puppies, and flowers. Traditional values of home, religion, patriotism were symbolized with the sweetness and piety. The production medium for this outpouring of Victorian popular graphics was chromolithography, an innovation of the Industrial Revolution that unleashed the flood of colorful printed images. To the people we are about to meet, this was not progress. This was folly, an absolute nightmare. And there were two costs they cared about. The first cost was the object. Cheap, dishonest, ugly, ornament divorced from craft, decoration with no idea why it existed. The second cost was the human being behind the whole process, the human being making it. Before the factory, a craftsman might see an object from raw material to finished thing, like from the beginning to the end of the process. After the factory, he did just one motion all day, forever, a hand attached to a process instead of the thinking, and that process he would never see the end of. The maker had been turned into a component. The critic John Ruskin put it this way, and quoting here, "You must either make a tool out of the creature or a man of him. You cannot make both." So this was his diagnosis of the age. The factory was very good at making tools out of men. And I'm sorry, men as in human beings most likely, but we are speaking about Victorian times, so mostly men. Really, mostly men. So, let's go back to the lonely craftsman, the individual who knew how to make the whole thing, well, by hand, and he was once again at the brink of extinction. Yeah, how about now, looking down the barrel? Does this look familiar? Soulless machines taking the place of a lonely craftsman, mass-produced slop, tons of kittens, children, decorations, live, laugh, love, paraphernalia, and it's welcomed by the masses? Well, if it does, congratulations. Apparently there's nothing new under the sun. This feeling was shared around 170 years ago by a man named William Morris. The difference is, his machine was made of iron and steam, and yours is made of weights and predictions, and I'm not at all sure that the difference matters as much as we'd like to. William Morris is born in 1834, just outside London, into some serious money. And here is the first irony of many, so let me underline it a little bit. The family fortune came from shares in a mine, Devon Great Consols, which was a copper mine, and when the veins were depleted, it kind of switched to digging up arsenic. Yeah, nice. The man who will spend his life raging against industry and reproducing nature by hand was funded his whole life by a hole in the ground that produced metal and later an industrial poison. He never really had to worry about money, and the reason he never had to worry about that money was the exact machine that he hated. So, after he was born, I guess, he was a strange, intense, and physically restless kid. ADHD much? I don't know. Obsessed he was with the medieval, before he can really say why, like Froissart's chronicles, suits of armor, churches. He really had a children's suit of armor and he rode a pony in it. Imagine that. Then he goes to Oxford, intending to become a clergyman for some reason. At Oxford, though, he meets Edward Burne-Jones, who becomes his lifelong friend, a co-conspirator, and eventually one of the greatest illustrators of the century. Two men then read Ruskin together, the one that I've mentioned earlier, and the church plan just quietly dies. In 1856, Morris does the respectable, creative thing. He apprentices himself to a Gothic revival architect named G.E. Street. He was going to be an architect, and then he lasts less than a year. But that year pays for itself, because in Street's office he meets Philip Webb, a quiet, brilliant architect who will later build Morris the house that starts everything, the Red House. In Webb's biography we learned what exactly Morris did that year. It says, professionally, he was occupied for much of the time in copying a drawing of the doorway of St. Augustine's Church in Canterbury. Wow. I guess it would be this church, I don't know, or even maybe the ruins of an old one, which is even more simple and miserable. Well, I know I would be bored as hell doing that. And apparently he was also. During this period, Morris was absolutely obsessed with John Ruskin. Let's go back to him. John Ruskin was a philosopher and architectural critic, I guess, and he had written a chapter in his book. The chapter was called The Nature of Gothic. It was buried inside a giant book about Venetian architecture. And that one chapter is genuinely the operating system for everything that Morris does next. Ruskin's argument is roughly this. Look at medieval Gothic cathedral. It's full of imperfections, a gargoyle slightly off, a carving a little rough, and those imperfections are not failures, they are the fingerprints of a free man who were allowed to think while they worked. The roughness is the proof of the freedom. The factory, by contrast, demands perfection, perfect, identical, repeatable, and to get it, it has to forbid the worker from thinking at all. What Ruskin says to this is this: no good work, whatever, can be perfect, and the demand for perfection is always a sign of misunderstanding of the ends of art. So, for Ruskin, and now for Morris, the ugliness of modern objects and the misery of modern workers are the same problem. You can't fix one without fixing the other. Beauty is a labor question. Morris will love this chapter so much that decades later he prints it as its own book, like just one chapter, and writes the preface himself. Okay, let's get back to the dramatic, dynamic duo of William Morris and Burne-Jones, who you might already forgotten about. The pair of our Oxford chaps made some significant moves. They have established Oxford and Cambridge magazine, and in January 1856, so the same year Morris went and became an apprentice with Street, and Burne-Jones met Rossetti, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the famous pre-Raphaelite painter. He met them at the Working Men's College in Great Ormond Street in London, where Rossetti was given tuition. Rossetti, who had actually read and admired the magazine, welcomed both of them. Burne-Jones immediately fell under Rossetti's spell and began taking painting lessons from him by Easter that year. Morris was introduced to Rossetti shortly after and was urged to take up painting as well. By November 1856, they all, Jones, Morris, Rossetti and a guy named Deverell, move in together to unfurnished rooms at 17 Red Lion Square. Rossetti convinces Morris and Burne-Jones that the future is painting, and Morris tries. He paints murals for the Oxford Union with the whole gang. He produces one finished easel painting of his life, of a woman who is about to become extremely important to his story. This painting is called La Belle Isolte, and it was sold for £75. It was a substantial sum back then. Could have bought around 250 sheep with that money, or like 15 good cows. And here's the thing Morris discovers, which is the most useful thing that he ever discovers about himself. He is not really a painter. No. What he is a designer. He has an almost supernatural feel for pattern, for surface, for how a flat, repeating thing should move across a wall or page. He is the man who makes the thing the painting hangs in feel alive. There is something to be said here about the moment you stop trying to be the genius that Dante Gabriel Rossetti told you to be, and admit what you are actually good at. And Rossetti, by the way, is described by Webb, whom I kind of trust, as a powerful, rather uncomfortable person. Yeah, I'm kind of shitting on him, but yeah, he wasn't a really cool dude. In 1859, Morris marries in 60th Philip Webb builds him a house, the Red House, and Morris and his friends decorate every inch of it themselves, by hand, because nothing they can buy is good enough. And that is the accident that lights the fuse. They just look around at the house they've made and think, what if this were the business? In 1861, they found a company. The full, glorious mouthful of a name is Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company. Morris plus Rossetti, Burne-Jones, Ford Madox Brown, Philip Webb, and a couple of others. They made stained glass, furniture, tiles, embroidery, wallpaper, woven and printed textiles, made properly, made by hand, made to mean something. This is the seed of what gets called the arts and crafts movement. The idea that the way the object is made is a moral and a political act, and that the minor arts, like a curtain, a chair, or a wallpaper, deserve the same seriousness as painting in a gallery. Quick lineage check, because people blur this. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Rossetti, Hunt, Millet, they formed back in 1848. And that was first about painting, a revolt against academic convention. Morris is the next generation. He takes the Pre-Raphaelite worship of the medieval and the sincere and pushes it off the canvas into the real, useful, everyday object. It's same romance, but different battlefield entirely. In 1875, the partnership detonates over money and credit. Who owns what, who owned what, and Morris, because he's probably the wealthiest of them all, just buys everyone out and reorganizes it as Morris and Company under his own sole name. File that away too. The question of whose name goes on the work is about to become the entire point of this video, eventually, I hope. We have to mention this here. I had to add this part purely because it's like unintentionally connects with my last video. Last time we ended in 15th century Venice with a Frenchman called Nicolas Janson, cutting the Roman letter forms that more or less taught Europe what a printed page is supposed to look like. So, 400 years later, an exhausted, world-famous middle-aged William Morris is going to sit down and rebuild by hand, one curve at a time. This is how it happens. In 1888, Morris's friend and neighbor, an engraver called Emery Walker, gives a lecture, lantern slides of medieval manuscripts and the very first printed books, incunabuli, and makes an argument that Morris had been circling his entire life without quite naming it. That a book is not text plus decoration. A book is a single thing. The paper, the ink, the type, the margins, the spacing, the pictures, you get the idea. It should be designed like a building, or just the whole thing is just noise. The ornament shouldn't sit on a page, it should be part of it. And the two of them, Morris and Emery, walk home together through the dark, and by the time Morris reaches his door, he is decided. He's going to make type. He's going to print. And he was 54. Most people at 54 are not picking up an entirely new craft from absolute zero. But Morris starts that December. And the way he does it tells you everything about him. He takes Janson's letters, like the Janson we talked about, and he has them photographically blown up, like up to 5 times their size, so he can see exactly how a curve meets the stem, where the weight sits, and how the empty space inside the letter is shaped. And then he draws them over and over and over, not tracing them. He's really explicit about this one, but to get the essence of them into his own hand. What comes of it carries Janson's spirit, but not Janson's corpse, so to speak. he names the finished typeface golden after the books he means to print first. It's the seed of everything that follows. He sets up shop near his house in Hammersmith. He drags an old hand press out of some printer's storeroom and just names the whole enterprise the Kelmscott Press. And then this supposedly cozy little nostalgia press becomes a machine from 1891 until it closes in 1898, after 2 years of Morris's death. So Kelmscott Press produces over 18,000 volumes across 53 different titles. And Morris designs 2 more typefaces named Troy and Chaucer, these heavy black letter faces built out of the early German printers. But they were made wider, rounder, and far more legible actually than the medieval models, because Morris, for all his romance, actually cared whether you could read the thing. And here's the detail I love most, because it reaches all the way back to Ruskin. Morris designed 644 blocks, borders, initials, frames, most of them engraved by a master craftsman who pulled out of the retirement to do it, right? And Morris's method was to paint, not to draw. Black background, white pattern, working back and forth, letting the design find itself on the block. He refused to neatly copy it out of the finished sketch because he believed that slavishly reproducing a drawing squeezes the life out of it. The roughness is the freedom. He is still fighting the factory while actually being a factory. And it all builds to one book, the Kelmscott Chaucer, 4 years in the making, 556 pages, 87 woodcut illustrations from his oldest friend, Burne-Jones, 14 huge borders, dozens of frames, and more than 200 initial letters and words, every one of them Morris's own hand, printed in black and red, in enormous folio. It is, flatly, one of the most beautiful books any human being has ever made. The first 2 finished copies are delivered on the 2nd of June 1896, one for Burne-Jones, one for Morris, who is, by now, dying. 4 months later, on the 3rd of October, he's gone, at 62. That book was almost literally the last thing he had left in him to make. And, well, Morris being Morris, the Kelmscott Press leaves us 2 perfect ironies on its way out of the door. The first one, this man fled into the deep past, escaped the modern world, and instead invented the future of book design. His obsession with the unified, well-made book, his typefaces drawn from old masters, and his insistence that the smallest initials must serve the whole page, that became the operating manual for the fine printing across the entire 20th century and bled straight into the commercial industry he despised. The handicraft crusader accidentally fathered modern graphic design. And the second thing is really odd. So, in going all the way back to medieval methods, Morris built his ornaments to be modular, interchangeable, repeatable. The same border, the same initial, dropped in again and again across different pages, across different books, which is the founding principle in industrial mass production, essentially, applied to the printed page. The machine he spent his life trying to outrun was sitting inside his most lovingly handmade object of the entire time. He couldn't escape it. In a way, he was it. Okay, we go back a little bit. By 1880s, Morris does the thing that surprises only the people who know him as the flowery wallpaper guy. He becomes a committed, militant socialist, not a dinner party sympathizer. He joint organizations, then finds those organizations too timid, then founds his own, the Socialist League, in 1884. He edits the newspaper, he gives lectures, he marches, he gets arrested, actually. His logic is just Ruskin's logic taken all the way to the end. If beauty is a labor question, if good objects can only be made by free, fulfilled makers, then you cannot have a beautiful world inside an economic system that grinds makers into components. Art requires the abolition of that system. He writes an utopian novel, News from Nowhere, and I don't think you can read it now. And he's imagining a future England where the factories are gone, work is joyful, and the houses of parliament are used to store manure. Yeah, that's probably the only joke that is relevant today. And here's the irony that he was painfully fully aware of, and this actually matters the most. His firm made luxury goods, handmade, labor-intensive, gorgeous, and therefore hugely expensive. The only people who could afford honest, beautiful, and anti-industrial Morris & Co. objects were exactly the rich industrialists he was trying to overthrow. He knew, he said so himself. He said something about spending his life ministering to the swinish luxury of the rich. The man building the case against the system was funded again by the system. First, the shares in the copper mine, now the very clients he despised. He never resolved this. He just kept working inside the contradiction until it kind of killed him. He dies of tuberculosis in 1896. He's worn out. One of his doctors reportedly gave the cause of death as essentially simply being William Morris and having done more work than most 10 men. It's possibly apocryphal. I found an interesting article arguing that the real diagnosis might be cancer, perhaps a colon or a kidney cancer that had well, it doesn't matter. At first I wanted to tell you about the tumultuous life of William Morris's family, his wife, the pre-Raphaelite muse, and the other innuendo. It's always catchy to bring some real-life gossip into discussion. Well, instead, brace yourself for a goddamn art lecture. Since this video is about style, it would be good to talk about his style and how it works. Let me try to make a case for it, because William Morris was a designer. It sounds obvious from here, but it wasn't obvious then, and understanding why it's true is the whole point of why he matters. Most of what gets made in the 19th century before Morris is, to put it one way, literature-centric. The serious visual art is actually painting, and the painting is, by definition, a one-off. One canvas, one artist, one object. You either own it or you don't. In contrast to this, let me just introduce you real quick to Josiah Wedgwood. Briefly, because he's like a means to an end here. Wedgwood is a Staffordshire potter who, in the 1770s and 80s, turns ceramics into an industry and gives the British middle class exactly the meaning they want: classical antiquity. The result is jasperware, the matte blue-grey stoneware with the relief figures lifted from Greek friezes. Goddesses, urns, laurel wreaths, you might know the look. It is still in production by 1840s, when Morris is growing up, by the way, so still relevant as an example. Point here isn't the object, the point is the logic behind it. There is a fashion, classicism, and the decorative arts exist to serve it. If you're wealthy, you commission a painting, like David's Oath of the Horatii, Roman virtue in oil on canvas. One step down, you buy a print or a reproduction. And if you're like a solidly middle class, with a mantelpiece to fill, you buy a Wedgwood vase. Same idea, same prestige, it's just different price point. And this is what I mean by literature-centric. The meaning is borrowed, in this case from Greece, from Rome, from antiquity, and the object is just the vessel that carries it. And crucially, the way the object looks is not considered an artistic decision, it's craft. Competent execution of someone else's idea. By the 19th century, the artist with like a capital A is basically a poet who happens to work in images. He deals in meaning. The craftsman just executes. The craftsman is more like a printer. He doesn't write the poem. He renders it faithfully with skill and then steps back. There is no artist in the Jasperware. And there is a theme and a craft and a material. That's the decorative landscape Morris inherits. And it's what he actually refuses entirely. That's why he did something completely different. He made art that could be reproduced, like a wallpaper, textiles, whatever, things you could put in your room and live with them. And that sounds mundane, but it is not mundane, because what he insisted on was the artist's hand and the artist's intention. It had to be present in that reproducible thing, not a factory worker following a template someone else designed as an afterthought, not a decoration, but an artist's intention, a vision held by a person executed with full attention. His particular vision happened to be medievalism, a version of the Middle Ages inflected in romantic British nationalism, the idea that things were made more honestly then, that a craftsman would understand a process from beginning to end, if one was responsible for it. Was this historically accurate? Well, roughly. Was that the point? Not really. The point was the principle. One person, one vision, beginning to end, applied to objects you actually use. That principle is design, not just graphic design. Interior design, product design, what we call later industrial design. The lineage here runs straight from Morris, through Art Nouveau, through the poster makers, and all the way to the Bauhaus. Visual decisions made on purpose for a specific object, for a specific use. Before Morris had that door open, it more or less didn't exist as a conscious practice. And here's the thing about his talent specifically. When Morris sat down to draw, actually draw, hand on paper, watching how the line moved, he set all of that aside. The socialism, the medievalism, the ideology, everything just went out the window. A different part of his brain took over. And I know this because I understand that feeling. He looked at the real flowers. He decided how abstract to make them or how much to flatten them into the pattern, how one form would weave into the next. He controlled that. And that control is why you can still buy it. Which brings me back to Rossetti. You can't buy Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Not really. There are a finite number of his paintings. They sit in collections and occasionally surface at an auction where they sell for enormous amounts of money to people who want them as historical objects or artifacts of a moment that has passed or as a pure financial investment. For that matter. The pre-Raphaelite romanticism, the symbolism, the yearning toward a Britain that existed before Raphael, that's not necessarily why you'd want to own an original Rossetti. You'd want one because it's unique, old, expensive, or maybe because it's beautiful. Yeah, for sure. Morris made something entirely different. He made something that is alive, not historically preserved, but alive, because it's design. And this is a specific property of design, which is that it can be reproduced without losing what it is. A strawberry thief on your wall in 2026 is not a lesser version of a strawberry thief. It is strawberry thief. The pattern doesn't degrade when it multiplies. That's the whole idea. And multiply it does. continuously, officially, unofficially, in all shapes and forms. 140 years later, the thing won't bloody stop reproducing itself. If Morris and his circle had been intellectually sophisticated but visually mediocre, if the ideas had been there but the hand hadn't, none of this would have happened. The arts and crafts movement would be a footnote. The phenomenon would not exist. It exists because of what he could do when he stopped talking and picked up a pencil. Now I want to make my actual point. I want to make my actual point. Okay. 45 minutes after I started. And I want to hold these three images of William Morris next to each other. Version 1, what Morris thought he was. A revolutionary, a man trying to abolish the conditions that produced ugly objects and broken workers. The design was to him almost side effect, byproduct of a much larger war against industrial capitalism. He'd have told you the wallpaper was the least important thing about him. Version 2, what was really happening. In his own lifetime, he was running a successful luxury brand, selling exquisite goods to the wealthy, while a team of enormously talented people, like his daughter May, for example, and his chief designer John Henry Deal and others, did a growing share of the actual designing, increasingly under his name. The revolution did not arrive. The brand thrived. And version 3 would happened in the 130 years since he died. This is where it gets almost unbearably ironic. The brand outlived the man completely. When Morris and Company finally folded in 1940, the wallpaper business and the rights to the name were simply bought. Today, they sit inside a company called Sanderson Design Group, which still prints William Morris wallpapers and fabrics in a factory for a comfortable middle to upper class market. The anti-industrialist's life's work is now an industrial product line, essentially. It is, point for point, the exact thing he built his career to oppose. Yada, yada, yada. And the patterns are everywhere. Not just on walls, on phone cases, tote bags, notebooks, fast fashion dresses, cafe wallpaper, your aunt's curtains. Strawberry Thief is probably within 20 meters of you more often than you think. The man who believed an object should carry the freedom of the hand that made it is now mechanically reproduced by the billion on objects he would have found definitely heartbreaking. A large share of the designs sold today as William Morris were not designed by William Morris. They were designed by John Henry Deal, who was head designer for the firm and was appointed the art director after William Morris died. By May Morris, who grew up inside the firm. She was William Morris's daughter, and she became a serious designer and craftswoman in her own right, ran the embroidery department, and then spent decades being filed under her father's name by later staff like Kathleen Kersey. The name of the product is a brand, not an author. The collaborators got absorbed into the signature and just quietly erased, which is the precise fate Morris's whole philosophy was supposed to prevent. The man who said that the maker matters became a label that hides its makers. And I know this because I fell for it myself. For years, I had 3 William Morris wallpapers in my old flat. I bought them as William Morris. I loved them as William Morris. I would have told you, and to my friends who are probably watching this, I told you with full confidence that I was living inside of the work of the great man, of William Morris. I researched this video, and none of the 3 is by William Morris. 2 of them, Blackthorn and Compton, are John Henry Deal. Compton was even sold for decades as Morris's last wallpaper. His daughter May put his name on it herself, and only later did anyone admit it was Dearl's. The third one, Honeysuckle, is May Morris's own design. Yeah, almost forgot them by now. And here's the catch inside of that catch. 2 of my 3 were published under William Morris's name on purpose. Not by mistake. Honeysuckle went out credited to William and only got handed back to May about 20 years later. The reason is on the record in museum's own notes. A design by May or by Dearl sold better with the famous name on it. The erasure wasn't slow forgetfulness of history, it was a marketing decision made in the moment to move more rolls of paper. So I'm not narrating this from like above. I am the exhibit A. I am the buyer who saw the famous name and never asked who actually drew the flowers, which is exactly precisely the thing this entire video is about. The originals, right? His masterpiece is the book. The Callum Scott Chaucer, printed by hand in the year he died, his last great act of craft. A single copy sells at auction today for somewhere around $100,000. A complete set of the Callum Scott Press books recently went for nearly $700,000. The handmade thing, the one he made to prove that machines couldn't do this, is now a rich person's trophy in a clamshell box. Exactly the swinish luxury. All over again. So, that's the top of the scale. Let me show you the bottom of it. After the wallpaper confession, I went looking through the what I actually owned now. The only genuine Morris and Company objects I currently own are 2 tea towels. Actually, can I have those? Just throw them. 2 tea towels. 2 tea towels. I bought them at an airport. I think it was Schiphol, but I don't remember. But I bought them the way you buy something to feel a little cultured between gates, you know. Everything else with his patterns that I have right now is a copy. There are 2 window blinds in a couple of rooms, like Morris flowers, Morris birds, almost certainly printed in a factory somewhere, probably in Guangzhou, by people who had never heard his name and were never meant to. The anti-industrialist mass-produced by an actual industry. On the other side of an actual planet. He would have wept. Okay, so here is the comparison I can't stop thinking about. The 2 genuine Morris & Co. tea towels, this one is actually a strawberry thief, they cost about 27 euros, I guess. 2 of them. For that money, IKEA will sell you something like 20 tea towels. Like cotton ones, they run about euro each. So the Morris name printed on the same basic square of cotton costs roughly 13 times more and does not dry a single dish better. Then the wallpaper. Roll of real Morris & Co. Strawberry Thief is north of 80 euros a roll, which would be like $100, right? And the deluxe flock versions sail past 120 easily. So I went looking for the cheapest possible version of the same thing, and Temu delivered. Easy. Self-adhesive roll, 6 meters, listed about 26 euros, but though this being Temu, a permanent limited time discount knocked it down to roughly 14. Cheaper than the real thing, yeah, but not nothing. It's not landfill cheap. Somebody is still making real money selling you William Morris's eye for pattern in a poly bag, and 491 of them sold apparently. And here's where I actually laughed. Here is irony number 18, or I don't know what. In Temu, they renamed it. The real design is called Strawberry Thief, named in 1883 for the thrushes Morris caught stealing fruit from his garden. The theft, the whole joke of this thing, the width, the warmth, the entire reason that this pattern has a soul. Now, Timo called it Strawberry Bird. So they edited the word thief out of the title. Probably something was going on there, right? And yeah, before anyone corrects me in the comments, yes, they are in their own right. This is all perfectly legal. Morris died in 1896, so his designs fell out of copyright generations ago, really. They belong now to absolutely everyone and to no one. Which means even my genuine airport tea towels might not be... No, they are. Actually, they are. The word real quietly stops meaning anything about the objects in your hands. The Timo roll and the Sanderson roll of the wallpaper can be of the same design, pixel by pixel, legally. The only thing you're actually paying for is the label and the permission to believe you're holding the real thing, which, if you've been paying attention, is the exact same trick that erased Deere and May Morris 100 years ago. The name was always the product. The flowers were always free. That's mass production finishing the job. The handmade chosa and the clamshell box and the strawberry bird roll in its poly bag are the same man's work, at two ends of a scale so long it stopped making any kind of sense. So, how is he perceived now? I guess as a wallpaper, as a vibe, a tasteful, slightly twee shorthand, heritage, cottagecore, good taste maybe. Almost nobody who buys the tote bag knows he wanted to burn economy down. The socialism just evaporated, the labor theory evaporated, the rage evaporated. What survived was the pattern itself. The one thing he would have told you mattered least. And going way back to the beginning, the medieval thing, almost gone now as well, as it is visibly only to you if you are an educated client. If you are like me, primed by the name. If the design is not only means British cozy wallpaper or maybe even pub wallpaper, and you're willing to buy it as this, as Morris. Okay, but how did he actually influence design? Well, obviously, enormously and permanently. Arts and crafts movement fed directly into Art Nouveau, into the Deutsche Werkbund, and through that lineage into the Bauhaus, and basically the entire idea of modern design as a discipline that takes everyday objects seriously. The notion you and I work inside of every day, that the design is a useful thing, is a real intellectual and moral act that's substantially his. He lost the war he thought he was fighting and won one he barely knew he was in. What builds you, your obsessions, your century, your pressure points, your money from your mines, that shapes what you make. That part you can almost understand. That part has reasons. But how the work lives once it leaves your hands, out there, past your death, past intentions, past your politics, that is very nearly random. Morris aimed at revolution and hit home decor. He guarded the dignity of the maker and became the label who hides its makers. He despised reproduction and became one of the most reproduced designers who ever lived. None of that was the plan. Almost none of it was in his control, and he's been dead since 1896. If there is a single thing that survives the randomness, it's not the message, it's not the intention, it's the value of the work itself. Strawberry Thief is still on that tote bag a century and a half later. For one boring, unglamorous reason, it's a genuinely, undeniably great pattern. The skill is the only part of the chaos couldn't dissolve.
Which leads me to the ultimate conclusion, and it's a small one, and I believe it. The only two things that matter are skill and perseverance, or as I prefer to call the second one, artistic stubbornness. The refusal to stop making the thing well, even when you can already see that the world is going to misunderstand it, sell it, copy it, declaw it, and slap it on a mug. Morris had both. He could not control what happened next. Neither can you, neither can I. Make it good anyway. Make it stubborn. Whew.